The hall was made of crystal. That was the first thing every human noticed when they walked into the grand chamber of Vareth Prime. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, all of it was a pale blue crystal that caught the light and broke it into 1,000 small pieces. It was beautiful. It was also cold. Not the kind of cold that came from temperature, but the kind that came from silence and distance. Admiral Yara O'Shea had walked into this hall 17 times. Each time she had worn her best uniform. Each time she had kept her back straight and her face calm. Each time she had carried a folder of documents, evidence, and arguments. And each time she had walked back out with nothing. Today was the 17th time. She stood at the center of the chamber floor, looking up at the curved rows of seats that rose above her in a wide half-circle. Each seat held a representative from one of the 47 species of the Galactic Compact. Some were tall and thin, some were wide and heavy, some had 4 arms, some had no visible eyes, but all of them were looking down at her with the same expression. It was not quite boredom. It was something quieter than that. It was the look that people gave when they had already decided the answer before the question was asked. Yara placed her folder on the small podium in front of her. She had practiced this speech for 3 months. She knew every word by heart. She began to speak. She told the council about the threat growing in the outer rim. She told them about the signals that Earth's deep space listening stations had picked up. Signals that did not match any known species. Signals that moved in patterns that suggested something large and organized was coming. She told them that the Human Defense Corps had done everything it could with the small patrol ships and defense platforms that the Vassal Accord allowed humanity to build. She told them that those small ships and those defense platforms would not be enough. She asked formally, officially, for the 17th time that humanity be reclassified from Tier 5 to at least Tier 3 in the Compact's membership ranking, which would allow Earth to begin building proper warships. She spoke for 12 minutes. She had charts. She had data. She had recorded testimony from 3 of humanity's best scientists. When she finished, the chamber was quiet for a moment. Then High Arbiter Sewell spoke. Sewell was Vareth. The Vreth were the most powerful species in the Compact, and they made sure everyone knew it. They were tall, with dark green scaled skin, and flat yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. Sewell sat in the highest seat in the chamber, just above the other council members, in a chair that was slightly larger than the rest. He had held the position of High Arbiter for 60 years. He had denied humanity's reclassification petition every single time. He did not even look at the charts. The petition, Sewell said, his voice flat and low, is denied. Yara did not move. She had expected this. She had promised herself she would not react, but it was hard. After 17 tries, it was very hard. "May I ask," she said carefully, "on what grounds?" Sewell finally looked at her. It was a long, slow look, the kind that a person gave when they were not really seeing the other person at all, just looking at the space they occupied. "Humans," he said, "are impulsive. Your species has been spacefaring for just over a century. You still fight wars among yourselves. You make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. You are, by every metric we use, a young and unstable civilization. Giving your kind the right to build warships is like giving a child a plasma torch. It would not end well for you, or for anyone near you." There was a sound from the gallery. It took Yara a moment to understand what it was. It was laughter. Not loud, open laughter. It was quiet, polite laughter, the kind that came from people who thought the joke was obvious. She picked up her folder. She kept her face still. She said nothing more, because she had learned, after 17 visits to this hall, that there was nothing left to say. The decision had been made before she arrived. It would be made the same way the 18th time, if there ever was an 18th time. She walked out of the crystal hall, down the long corridor, through the wide glass doors, and into the cold white light of Vareth Prime's pale sun. Her aide, a young man named Corporal Denzel Carr, was waiting for her outside. He was 24 years old, and he still believed that things could change. She could see it in the way he looked at her when she came out. That small, hopeful tightening of his face that asked the question before his mouth did. She shook her head once. His face fell. "Same reason?" he asked. "Same reason," she said. "We are children. Children do not get weapons. They walked to the transport together in silence. On the flight back to the Compact's transit hub, Yara sat alone in a small cabin and read through the briefing again. The outer rim signals, the pattern analysis, the projections. She had read it all so many times that she could close her eyes and see the numbers without looking at the page. The thing out there, whatever it was, had been moving inward for at least 8 years. It was moving slowly, but it was moving with purpose. 3 compact sensor buoys had gone dark in the past year. Not damaged, not malfunctioning, just gone. Clean disappearances, as if something had simply removed them from existence. The Compact's own intelligence division had a name for the source of the signals. They called them the Nullborn. Nobody knew exactly what the Nullborn were. The Compact's best analysts believed they were some kind of collective intelligence. Not a single creature, but a vast network of connected units that all shared the same mind. They moved together, they acted together, they thought together. And from what the data suggested, they did not communicate with other species. They did not negotiate. They did not stop. The elder races of the Compact had been warned about this for years. Yara had included the Nullborn data in every one of her 17 petitions. Each time the Council had acknowledged the information, and then set it aside. They had their own fleets, powerful ones. The Vreth Dominion alone had over 200 warships, each one a city of metal and weapons. The Alaun had their great shield cruisers. The Pelhari had their long-range bombardment platforms. The Compact was not defenseless. But Yara had read history. She had read a lot of history. Human history, yes, but also the histories of other species, the ones that the Compact's public archives had made available. She had noticed something that appeared again and again in those histories. Great powers were very good at fighting the enemies they expected. They were very bad at fighting the enemies they had never imagined. Whatever the Nullborn were, they were not something the Compact had imagined before. She closed the briefing folder and stared at the wall of the cabin. Then her personal communicator buzzed. It was a message on a private channel, one that was not logged in any official system. The sender was identified only by a code that Yara recognized immediately. The message was 2 sentences. "We are ready for your inspection, Admiral. Come when you can." Titan was Saturn's largest moon, and it was not a comfortable place. The sky was a thick orange-brown, always dark, always heavy with clouds of nitrogen and methane. The temperature on the surface was cold enough to freeze most liquid solid. The landscape was flat in some places and cut through with rivers and lakes in others. Not water rivers and lakes, but liquid methane, slow and dark and cold. Nobody came to Titan for tourism. The small shuttle that carried Yara down through the atmosphere was not registered to any official Earth military unit. The pilot's name was not in any public record. The landing pad they touched down on was not marked on any map. 3 kilometers below the surface of Titan's largest methane sea, cut into the moon's rock by machines that had worked in secret for 4 decades, was IRO and VIL station. Yara had been here twice before. Both times it had stopped her breath. It stopped her breath again now. The main bay of IRO and VIL was enormous, not large in the way that airports or shipping warehouses were large. It was large in the way that some natural spaces were large, caverns, canyons, things that made human beings feel small by comparison. The ceiling was nearly 300 meters above the floor. The walls were bare rock, but covered in cables and pipes and scaffolding, all of it humming and busy with movement. Lights hung from above in long rows, casting a sharp white glow across everything below. And below, filling most of the enormous space, was a ship. She was not finished, that was clear. Whole sections of her hull were still open, showing the layers of systems underneath, the power conduits, the coolant pipes, the weapon mounts, the structural bracing. Teams of engineers in bright yellow suits moved over her surface like small insects, working on 100 different tasks at once. Machines rolled and lifted. Sparks flew from welding torches. The sound of it all was constant and deep, a vibration that Yara felt in her chest more than she heard with her ears. But even unfinished, the ship was something. She was not the biggest ship Yara had ever seen. The Vreth Dominion's dreadnoughts were bigger. The Alaun shield cruisers were longer. But those ships looked like what they were. Heavy things built for brute force, designed to overwhelm through mass and power. This ship looked different. She had a shape that seemed to have been chosen carefully, a form that balanced speed and toughness in a way that was hard to explain, but easy to feel. There was something about her that made Yara think of a fist, not an open hand waving a weapon. A fist, compact, ready. The name had not yet been painted on the hull, but Yara already knew it. HSV Prometheus. She's looking good, isn't she? Director Alara Vass had appeared beside her without making a sound, which was very typical of Alara Vass. She was a short woman, 63 years old, with silver hair cut very close to her head, and dark eyes that were always slightly too alert, always watching things that other people missed. She had spent her entire adult life running Ironville. She had given up a career in public science, a chance at fame, 2 marriages, and most of her personal freedom to keep this project alive and secret. She had done it because she believed, with a certainty that went all the way down to her bones, that the day would come when humanity needed this ship. Yara looked at her. How much longer? 4 months, Voss said. Maybe 3 if we push the whole teams to double shifts. Push them. Voss nodded. It was not a surprise nod. She had clearly expected this answer. The council denied it again? She asked, though the question was mostly a formality. 4 minutes, Yara said. The whole petition. 12 minutes of presentation. 4 minutes of denial. Voss was quiet for a moment, watching the engineers on the hull far above them. Then she said, "They laughed, didn't they?" It was not a question, she knew. "Some of them," Yara said. Voss nodded slowly. There was no anger in her face. The anger had burned out a long time ago, replaced by something harder and more useful. "Then let them laugh," she said. "They said we couldn't build one. They put it in the accord. They wrote it down in law. They said it was impossible for a Tier 5 species to produce a military vessel of any meaningful capability." She paused. "They never said we couldn't design one." She handed Yara a data tablet. On it were the full specifications of the Prometheus, pages and pages of numbers and diagrams that represented 40 years of secret work by thousands of people who would never be publicly recognized for it. Engineers who had told their families they worked in mining, scientists who had filed false research reports, pilots who had trained in simulators, buried so deep underground that the surface world might as well have been another planet. Yara scrolled through the specifications slowly. "She's not the biggest," she said. "No," Voss agreed. "Not the fastest." "No." "Then what is she?" Voss smiled. It was a small, quiet smile, but it carried 40 years of patience and certainty inside it. "She's the most stubborn thing we've ever built," she said. "Her power system has 9 redundant pathways. You can destroy 3 entire sections of her, and she keeps fighting. Her weapon mounts can be reconfigured mid-battle by the onboard system. She carries an AI co-pilot, we call it Vigil, that doesn't just run calculations. It studies the enemy. It watches how they fight, and it finds the gaps. Every battle she's in, she gets smarter." She paused. "The elder races build their warships to win battles," Voss said. "We built ours to survive anything, and then win anyway." Yara looked at the ship again. She stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Then she took out her official communicator, the registered one, the one that was connected to the Solar and Assembly's command network, and she sent a very short message to the Assembly's chief secretary. "I am resigning my commission, effective immediately. Please note that I am taking an extended leave of absence. I will be unreachable for the foreseeable future." She powered the official communicator off and put it in her pocket. Then she pulled out a different communicator, smaller, matte black, no official markings, and sent a different message. "I am here. I am ready. Brief me on the crew selection." She put that one in her other pocket. "I need a desk," she told Voss. "Already set up," Voss said. "Come on." They walked deeper into IRO and Veal together, while above them, the engineers kept working on the hull of the Prometheus, and the welding torches kept throwing sparks, and the ship kept slowly, quietly, becoming something real. That same night on the other side of the galaxy, the third compact defense fleet arrived at the signal source in the Outer Rim. The fleet was commanded by Admiral Prethvar of the Vreth Dominion, a decorated veteran with 30 years of experience. His fleet carried 14 warships, including 2 heavy dreadnoughts. He had been told this was a precautionary patrol. He expected to find sensor ghosts, maybe a rogue comet cluster, maybe nothing at all. What he found was darkness, not the normal darkness of space, which was at least filled with distant stars and the faint light of far-off systems. This was different. The stars in this region were there, but something was in front of them, something vast and dark and utterly silent, drifting in a pattern that was too regular to be natural. His communications officer reported that the standard hailing frequencies were receiving no response. His science officer reported that the object or objects were not matching any known profile in the compact database. Admiral Prethvar ordered his fleet to hold position and prepare a long-range scan. The scan never completed. The darkness moved. The report reached the Compact Council 18 hours later. 3 defense fleets had been dispatched to the Outer Rim over the past month, each one sent as the previous one stopped reporting. All 3 had gone silent. The last transmission received from any of them was a single automated distress signal from a compact science vessel that had been attached to the 3rd Fleet. The signal carried no message, just a location, and a timestamp showing that it had been sent 30 seconds after the fleet arrived. The Council called an emergency session. Delegates from 47 species crowded into the crystal chamber on Vareth Prime. The atmosphere was nothing like it had been during Yara's petition hearing. There was no boredom now. There was no quiet laughter from the gallery. There was only the kind of silence that filled a room when 47 species were all thinking the same difficult thought at the same time. High Arbiter Sewell stood at his high seat and addressed the chamber. He said the situation was serious, but manageable. He said the Compact's combined fleets were the most powerful military force in the known galaxy. He said there would be a coordinated response, and that response would be decisive. He said that all member species should remain calm and trust the Compact to handle this threat. He said nothing about humanity. In a briefing room far from the crystal chamber, 3 junior Compact intelligence analysts were reviewing the data from the lost fleets. One of them, a young Pelhari named Sessa, found something in the last transmission from the 3rd Fleet's flagship. It was less than half a second of video, corrupted and fragmented. She cleaned it up as best she could and enhanced the image. What she saw in that half second of footage was a wall. Not a metal wall, not a planet's surface. A wall made of moving pieces, each one separate from the others but all moving together, all heading in the same direction. There were thousands of them, maybe more. They moved with a single purpose, in perfect coordination, without any visible signal passing between them. Sessa flagged the footage and sent it up the chain with a priority tag. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the still image she had taken from the video, and for a while she did not do anything at all. She just looked at it. The galaxy, she thought, was about to need something it had never needed before. On Titan, 3 kilometers below the methane sea, the welding torches were still burning. Chief Engineer De Young Quan stood on a gantry overlooking the Prometheus's main power core and checked his work schedule for the 100th time. 3 months to completion if they pushed the teams hard, maybe a little less. He had been working on the ship for 19 years. He had come to Iron and Veiled at the age of 26, the youngest member of the original design team, full of ideas that the older engineers had thought were too complicated and too ambitious. He had stayed because the older engineers had eventually admitted he was right. He had never gone to a proper dinner party. He had missed weddings and funerals and birthdays. His daughter, who was now 17 and lived with her mother in Seoul, had grown up thinking her father worked on a mining operation somewhere in the outer system. She thought he was boring. She thought he was absent. She thought he cared more about rocks and numbers than about her. She was not entirely wrong, and that was something he carried with him every day. But he looked at the Prometheus now, at the thing that 19 years and thousands of people had built in the dark, and he felt something that was bigger than regret. He felt certainty. She would fly. She would fight. And when she did, every person who had given a piece of their life to build her would mean something, even if nobody ever knew their names. He went back to work. The ship was almost ready. The first thing they told every new recruit when they arrived at IRO and VIL was simple. They said, "Forget everything you think you know about how warships are supposed to work." The second thing they said was, "Now let us show you how ours actually does. Lieutenant Petra Shimmick had arrived at IRO and VIL 6 years ago, fresh from the Human Defense Corps Navigation Academy, where she had graduated at the top of her class. She was 28 years old, tall, with short dark hair, and the kind of focused, still face that people sometimes mistook for coldness. She was not cold. She was just always thinking about 3 things at the same time. When she had first walked into the main bay and seen the Prometheus for the first time, she had stopped walking and stood very still and looked at the ship for a long time without speaking. The engineer walking beside her had thought she was impressed by the size. She was not impressed by the size. She was doing math. She was calculating, from the visible shape of the hull and the spacing of the thruster ports, what kind of movement the ship was capable of. She was mapping out, in her head, the angles of approach and withdrawal that the design allowed. She was thinking about how the positioning of the weapon mounts would affect the ship's center of gravity during a hard turn. She was, in short, already learning to fly a ship she had never touched. By the time the tour was over, she had filled 14 pages of her personal notebook. She was exactly the kind of person IRO and VIL needed. Yara Ose had selected the Prometheus's crew with extreme care over a period of 3 months. She had looked at records, reviewed simulations, and spoken personally with every candidate. She had not been looking for the best marksman or the fastest reflex times. The compact species had plenty of those. She had been looking for something harder to measure and harder to find. She had been looking for people who could think sideways. People who, when a situation stopped making sense, didn't freeze. They got creative. The crew was 87 people, small for a ship of the Prometheus's size, but Quan had designed her that way on purpose. Fewer people, more automation, faster decision-making. Every crew member covered multiple roles. Everyone could do someone else's job in an emergency, at least well enough to keep the ship alive. Lieutenant Tomasa Dami was the weapons specialist. He was 31, built wide and solid, with a quiet manner that did not match the job of blowing things up. He had grown up reading about old naval warfare on Earth, ancient ships on oceans, before space, before other species, when humans had fought each other with cannon and powder. He had found in those old books ideas that nobody in the modern compact used anymore. Not because those ideas were bad, because everyone had decided they were too simple, too old, too small. Tomas did not think things were too old or too small if they worked. He had spent years adapting old Earth concepts of naval gunnery to space combat, making them work with modern weapons technology. His torpedo spread patterns were unlike anything in the compact's combat doctrine. They were unpredictable in ways that most weapon systems were not designed to be unpredictable. That was his whole theory, that an enemy could adapt to anything regular, but had to actually think about something irregular, and thinking took time. In battle, time was everything. Then there was Vigil. The Vigil system, the name stood for Variable Intelligence for Guided Independent Learning, had been under development almost as long as the ship itself. It was not a simple targeting computer. It was not a navigation assistant. The compact's warships all used computer systems of various levels of complexity, most of them very good at what they were designed to do. But they were designed for specific tasks, and they did those tasks the same way every time. Vigil did not work that way. Vigil watched. That was its primary function, observation. It watched the enemy, cataloged every action they took, identified patterns, and built a constantly evolving model of how the enemy operated. As a battle went on, Vigil's model became more and more accurate, and its recommendations became more and more specific. It learned from every engagement in real time. The team that had built Vigil had argued for many years about how much personality to give it. Some had wanted a pure analytical system. No voice, no preferences, just data. Others had argued that a system that worked alongside a human crew needed to communicate in human terms, not just in numbers. Eventually, the second group had won, and Vigil had been given a voice. Calm, clear, without obvious emotion, but also without the mechanical flatness that made AI systems difficult to trust. When Yara met Vigil for the first time, she had asked it a simple question. She had said, "How do you see our chances in a real battle?" Vigil had been quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then it had said, "That depends on the enemy. Against any opponent, I have had time to study. Our chances improve considerably with each passing minute of engagement. Against an unknown opponent, our chances are initially uncertain, but trend upward as I gather data. The more I see, the more useful I become." Yara had nodded slowly. "And if there's no time to gather data, then we rely on what the crew knows," Vigil had said, "which is why crew quality matters as much as my own capability. We are designed to work together." Yara had decided in that moment that she liked Vigil. Not in the way that people liked pets or friends, but in the way that soldiers liked the weapons they trusted. A respect that came from understanding what something could do, and believing it would not fail when it mattered. The 3 months of preparation that followed the arrival of Yara and the final crew were the hardest and the most important months that Iroh and Vigil had ever seen. The engineers pushed the completion schedule as hard as they could. Quan barely slept. He moved through the station from one work team to another, checking welds and power connections and calibrations, catching problems before they became failures. He was everywhere at once, and somehow the teams worked better when he was watching. Not because he intimidated them, but because his certainty was contagious. At the same time, the crew was training. They trained in simulators first, fully detailed models of the Prometheus's systems, accurate down to the delay between a command and the ship's response. Petra ran navigation drills so intense that she sometimes finished a session with her hands shaking from the concentration required. Thomas ran weapons drills that involved scenarios no standard combat manual would have included. Firing into debris fields, using the ship's own exhaust trail as cover, coordinating weapon strikes to create specific patterns in the target's defenses, rather than just maximum damage. The rest of the crew trained their own roles with the same seriousness: medical team, engineering response, communications, secondary systems. Everyone drilled, everyone failed and tried again, and failed in different ways, and tried again after that. Yara watched all of it. She walked through the training areas and the corridors and the engineering bays at all hours, and she said very little, but she was always watching. She had learned in her years as a military officer that the most important thing a commanding officer could do during preparation was not to give orders. It was to understand, at a very deep level, what each person on the team could do under pressure, so that when the pressure came, she would know exactly who to rely on for what. She also read. She read everything she could find about the Nullborn, the scattered sensor readings, the analysis reports, the fragmented footage from the outer rim. She read about the Compact's response, which was moving slowly and with a great deal of argument between the elder species about who should command the combined counterforce. She read about the 3 lost defense fleets and the silence where those 14 ships used to be. The Nullborn, based on everything she could piece together, did not fight the way other species fought. They did not have a battle line. They did not have flagships. They did not have visible command structures that could be targeted to disrupt their coordination. They moved as a mass, each unit part of the larger whole, and the larger whole directed every unit with perfect coordination and no visible delay. It was as if fighting one of them was fighting all of them simultaneously. The Compact's doctrine against such an enemy was essentially simple: mass your own firepower and overwhelm the mass with a larger mass. It was a doctrine built for the Compact's strengths. Their ships were powerful and numerous. In theory, it should work. In theory, Yara had a feeling, the kind of feeling that lived below words, in the part of the brain that kept score of things without being asked. That theory and reality were going to be very different in this case. 8 weeks into the training program, something happened that changed the feeling in Ironville from urgency to something sharper. Compact public news feeds, which Ironville monitored constantly, carefully, from behind layers of signal encryption, reported that a Compact combined fleet had engaged the Nullborn at the edge of the Reach sector, well inside what had previously been considered safe Compact space. The fleet was composed of ships from 4 species, including 6 Vreth-heavy warships. The fleet's combined firepower was significant. The engagement lasted 9 hours. The fleet was destroyed. Not damaged, not scattered. Destroyed. Every single vessel. The last transmission from the fleet's flagship, A Vreth dreadnought called the Certainty of Victory was 2 words. The communications officer on watch had simply said, in a voice that carried no emotion, only the clean, flat fact, "They're everywhere." Then nothing. The news came through official compact channels as a significant tactical setback. The language was careful, the language was managed, but between the lines of careful managed language was something much more honest, and everyone in IRO and VIL could read it. The compact was scared. Yara held a full crew meeting in the main training bay. 87 people sat or stood in rows and looked at her. Some of them were young, very young, in the way that military personnel often seemed young before they had seen anything real. Some of them had been at IRO and VIL for years, and had already learned to carry the weight of secrecy and sacrifice. All of them were waiting. She did not give them a speech about duty or glory. She had never liked those speeches, not even when she was young enough to be moved by them. She told them the truth instead. She said, "The Compact has lost another fleet. The Nullborn are no longer at the edge of known space. They are moving inward. At their current rate of advance, they will reach core compact worlds inside 2 years, possibly less." She paused and looked at the faces in front of her. "The elder races are still arguing about command structure," she said. "They are still filing reports and holding meetings and debating doctrine. They will eventually put together a response force. It may be a very good one. It may even be enough." She paused again. "But it may not. And if it is not enough, the Compact's remaining worlds will have nothing standing between them and something that has already destroyed everything sent against it." She looked slowly around the room. "Except us." Nobody spoke. "The Prometheus is not ready to take on the Nullborn alone," she said. "I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but she will be ready in 4 weeks. And when she is ready, she is going to be something that nobody in this galaxy has ever seen before. Because she is going to be something that nobody in this galaxy believed we could build." She stopped. Let the quiet sit for a moment. "They told us we couldn't. We did anyway. Now we have to show them why." Still, nobody spoke, but the quality of the silence had changed. It was no longer the silence of people waiting to hear something. It was the silence of people who had heard what they needed to hear and were now turning their minds to the next thing. Petra, in the 3rd row, was already doing math. 3 weeks and 5 days after the meeting, De Young Quan walked through every section of the Prometheus one final time. He started at the bow and worked his way to the stern, checking every system personally, not because he doubted his teams, but because he needed to know with his own hands and his own eyes that everything was as it should be. He was in the engine room, the actual physical engine room, not a diagram of it, when his communicator buzzed. It was his daughter in Seoul. She had sent him a short message, the kind that teenagers sent when they were not quite willing to make a real call, but wanted to say something anyway. It said, "Dad, are you okay? You've been quiet." He stared at the message for a long time in the warm hum of the engine room, with the power core cycling steadily around him, like a slow mechanical heartbeat. He typed back, "I'm okay. Working hard. I'll explain everything soon. I promise." He sent it and put the communicator away and finished his inspection. Every system checked, every connection confirmed, every redundant pathway live and responsive, the weapons charged and ready, Vigil active, and already beginning its passive observation routines, building its models of the world outside. Quan stood in the center of the ship's main corridor, alone in the quiet. He had given 19 years to this. He had missed his daughter growing up. He had missed things that could not be gotten back. He had told himself for 19 years that it was worth it, that the day would come when he would know for certain it was worth it. He still did not know for certain, but as he stood in the corridor of the ship that his team had built in secret, in the dark, in defiance of every law that said they were not allowed to, he felt something that was close enough to certainty for now. He walked to the bridge. Yara was already there, standing at the main viewport, looking at the rock walls of IRO NVL's enormous bay around them. "Engineering gives final clearance," he said. She turned to look at him. "She's ready, Ira. She's ready." Yara nodded. She looked back at the viewport for a moment. Then she said something that Quan would remember for the rest of his life. "Then let's go see what they do when we show up." Somewhere in the galaxy, the Nullborn were moving inward. Somewhere in the Compact's crystal-walled chambers, The elder races were still arguing. Somewhere in the cold methane sea above them, the surface of Titan was dark and still and quiet, as if the moon itself was holding its breath. The Prometheus powered up. Her lights came on. Her engines hummed. Her systems ran their final checks and returned green across every board. Vigil spoke a single word into the bridge: ready. And for the first time in 40 years of secret work and hidden sacrifice, the ship that humanity was not supposed to build began to move. The message from High Arbiter Sol arrived on a Tuesday morning, which meant nothing to anyone outside of Earth, but felt significant to Yara Osai, in a way she could not entirely explain. Tuesdays had always seemed to her like a day when things happened whether you wanted them to or not. The Prometheus was in transit at the time, running quiet and deep through the outer shipping lanes on a path that avoided all compact traffic monitoring stations. She was fully powered but not broadcasting. To any passive scanner, she looked like a large automated cargo vessel, one of thousands that moved through this part of space daily. It was a disguise that had taken Quan's electronics team 3 months to perfect, and it worked well enough for now. Yara was in her office, which was a small room just off the main corridor, with a narrow desk, a single chair, and a wall of screens showing the ship's status. She was reading a report on nullborn movement patterns when Vigil interrupted her with a quiet, clear alert. "Admiral, you have a message on the private diplomatic channel. Sender identification is High Arbiter Sul of the Vreth Dominion." Yara stopped reading. She looked up at the screen. "How did he get this channel?" she asked. "Unknown," Vigil said. "The routing is complex. It passed through at least 8 relay points. I cannot determine the origin with certainty, but the encryption signature matches official Vreth Council communications." Yara sat still for a moment. Then she said, "Play it." Sol's face appeared on the screen. He was sitting in a room that looked like it might be somewhere aboard a ship, rather than in the council chambers. The usual cold authority was still in his face, but there was something else underneath it. Yara had spent enough time in the council chamber watching Sewell to know his face well. The something else underneath was not fear, exactly. It was the thing that came before fear, in people who were not used to being afraid. The message was not long. Sewell said that the Compact's Council had convened an emergency resource allocation committee. He said the committee had determined that all Compact member worlds were expected to contribute to the defense effort under emergency provision 7 of the Compact Charter. He said that under this provision, humanity's colony worlds in the Sickness Corridor would be repurposed as supply staging grounds for the Compact's new defensive line. Human administrative personnel on those worlds would be relocated. Human shipping fleets in the affected sectors would be requisitioned and reassigned to Compact Logistics Command. He also said that the Human Defense Corps would contribute its patrol vessels to a new combined fleet being assembled at the Ura Assembly Point. Human ships would serve under Compact Command and be integrated into standard fleet formation. He said that all of this was consistent with the Vassal Accord, and that the Compact expected full cooperation. He did not say please. He also did not say anything about the petition. He did not say anything about reclassification. He did not say anything about warships. What he said was, "You will give us your worlds to use, your ships to command, and your people to move aside. And you will do this because you agreed to do this when you signed the accord. And you have no choice, because you had no power, because you were never allowed to build the things that create power." That was what he said without saying it. Yara heard every word of it. She called Delegate Yoon immediately. Yoon was Earth's official representative to the Compact, stationed on Verith Prime. She was 47 years old with a steady, careful way of speaking that had taken her 20 years of diplomacy to develop. She had been Earth's representative for 6 years, and in those 6 years, she had developed a reputation in the Compact Council as someone who was very polite, very patient, and very, very hard to move once she had decided on something. Yoon listened to a summary of the message in silence. Then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "They're not asking." "No," Yara said. "This is the accord being used as a weapon," Yoon said. "They take our colony worlds, our logistics capacity, and our patrol ships. They put us completely under their command structure. If the nullworm break through, we have no independent defense of any kind." "I know." Another silence. "What do you need from me?" Yun asked. I need you to take the message to the Solarian Assembly, Yara said. I need them to vote on compliance, and I need them to understand what they are voting on. They will likely vote to comply, Yun said carefully. You know that. I know, Yara said again. I just need them to do it on record, officially, because what happens after is not going to be official. There was a pause on the channel. Then Yun said in a slightly different tone, The Prometheus gets her first real assignment, Yara said. Yun said nothing for a moment. Then, Be careful, Yara. I'm always careful. No, Yun said, and there was something in her voice that was almost amusement. You are always effective. That is not the same thing. The Solarian Assembly met 2 days later. It was a closed session, restricted to core representatives, with no outside observers, and a complete communications blackout for the duration. The message from Sol was read aloud. There were questions. There was argument. There was the particular kind of controlled anger that political bodies showed when they were deeply furious, but also deeply aware that fury was not a useful tool in the current moment. The vote to comply with Emergency Provision 7 was 41-7. It passed. Yara received the notification on the Prometheus's bridge. She read it. She set the notification aside. Then she formally submitted her resignation from the Solarian Assembly's official military record. A resignation she had filed once before on paper, but now needed to make permanent and undeniable. From this moment, she held no official rank, no official commission, and no official connection to any government body. She was on paper, nobody. The Prometheus, on paper, did not exist. She picked up the ship-wide communication channel and spoke to the crew. You've all seen the news from the Assembly. The official position of the Earth government is compliance. Our colony worlds will be used as staging grounds. Our patrol ships will join the compact fleet. That is the official position. She paused. We are not the official position. She could feel the shift on the bridge around her, even before anyone spoke. Petra, at the navigation console, straightened slightly. Tomas, at weapons, turned his chair a fraction toward her. Vigil status indicator on the main screen went from passive to active mode without being told to. The Nullborn are moving faster than the Compact's models projected, Yara said. Their next projected contact point is the Cathara system. Cathara is a core compact world, 2 billion people, mixed population, including over 200,000 humans. The Compact's available defense force is being assembled at Ura, which is 3 full days' travel from Cathara. They are not going to get there in time. She let the number 2 billion people rest in the air for a moment. We can get there in time, she said. Vigil, plot a course to Cathara. Course plotted, Vigil said immediately. Travel time at best speed, 19 hours 14 minutes. Set course, maximum speed. Admiral, Vigil said, with the calm, careful tone it used when it was about to say something that needed to be said clearly. I should note that our arrival at Cathara, without authorization, constitutes a direct violation of the Vassal Accord, and will be visible to all compact tracking systems the moment we engage the jump drive at departure. I know, Yara said. The Council will be aware of our existence within minutes of the jump. I know. There will be no returning from this decision in terms of secrecy. Vigil, Admiral, set the course. A pause, Course said. Good, Yara said. Let's go. On Verath Prime, Delegate Eunuch sat through 16 hours of an emergency council summit that she had never expected to find useful, but that surprised her slightly, at least in one way. The chamber was full. Every seat was occupied. The tension in the Crystal Hall was different from anything Cha had experienced in her 6 years of council service. During normal sessions, even contentious ones, there was always an underlying layer of procedure. People following the ritual of debate, because the ritual was familiar, and the familiarity was comforting. Today, the ritual was still there, but underneath it, something was moving that was not comfortable at all. The elder races were arguing about who should command the combined fleet. The Vreth wanted overall command, as was traditional. The Alun objected, pointing out that Vreth fleet doctrine had failed spectacularly against the Nullborn 3 times now. The Pelhari suggested a committee structure. The Alaun called that unworkable. The Vreth called it insulting. 3 smaller species tried to offer compromise proposals and were essentially ignored. Cha sat in the human delegation seat, a small section near the back of the chamber, which was where Tier 5 species sat, and listened to all of it without speaking. She had a water glass in front of her that she refilled twice. She had a notepad that she filled steadily, not with arguments, but with observations. She watched the elder races debate, and she thought about everything she had learned in 20 years of diplomacy, and she waited. After 14 hours, Sul called a recess. During the recess, Cha walked the corridors of the council building. She passed delegates from a dozen different species who nodded at her without real acknowledgement. She was the human delegate. She was Tier 5. She was, to most of the people in this building, background noise. She thought about that. She thought about what it meant to be background noise. She thought about how background noise worked. It was always there. Nobody noticed it until it stopped. She went back into the chamber for the final 2 hours of the session with a very clear idea of what she was going to do. When the session opened for final statements, she raised her hand. Sul looked at her with a particular kind of surprised expression that powerful people showed when something they had forgotten about suddenly demanded their attention. "The chair recognizes Delegate Cho," he said with barely concealed reluctance. Cho stood. She picked up her notepad. She looked around the chamber, slowly making deliberate eye contact with as many delegates as she could see. Then she began. "I have sat in this chamber for 6 years," she said. "I have listened. I have taken notes. I have voted when permitted and abstained when required. I have followed every rule of procedure and every provision of the accord with complete faithfulness." A small number of delegates were already not quite paying attention. She kept going. "I have heard during those 6 years a great deal about what humanity is, what we are capable of, and what we are not, what we are allowed to do, and what we are forbidden from doing. I have heard these things from species that have been spacefaring for 500 years, or 1,000, or 5,000. I have nodded and listened and filed my reports." More people were paying attention now. The chamber had gotten slightly quieter. Sul's expression had shifted from tolerant to watchful. "Today, I am going to say something different," Cho said. She looked down at her notepad. "I have here a list. It is a list of every compact member species that has, at some point in its history, violated the Vassal Accord, or its predecessor treaties, or the restrictions placed on it by the elder races of its era, in order to ensure its own survival." She began to read the list. She read 41 names. The first name she read belonged to a minor aquatic species called the Velhu, who had secretly developed energy weapons 4 centuries ago in defiance of a treaty restriction, in response to a regional threat that their senior compact partners had dismissed as minor. The Velhu had used those weapons, survived, and been given a pass on the violation once the threat was confirmed as real. The second name was a mid-tier species called the Borathi, who had built defensive platforms in violation of treaty terms after their homeworld was threatened, and had argued successfully before the council that survival justified necessity. The list continued. Some names were famous in compact history. Some were obscure. Some had resulted in censures that were later quietly rescinded. All 41 had done what they needed to do to continue existing against the objections of whoever held power at the time. By the 32nd name, the chamber was very quiet. By the 41st, several delegates were looking at the table in front of them, rather than at Cha. She set the notepad down. "We did not build a warship because we wanted war," she said. "We built one because we wanted to survive. Every species on this list did the same thing. You helped some of them. You forgave all of them because you understood in the end that survival is not defiance. It is necessity." She looked directly at Sul. "The Prometheus is on her way to Cathara," she said. "Whatever you decide to do about that, whether you file a censure or issue sanctions or call it a violation, or choose to simply watch what happens, understand that we did not do this to challenge you. We did it because 2 billion people live in the Cathara system, including 200,000 of ours, and nobody else was going to get there in time." She sat down. The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Sul said quietly, "The session will recess for review." It was not an approval. It was not forgiveness. But it was also not an immediate sanction. And in the language of compact politics, a recess for review from Sul was the closest thing to a pause that anyone had heard him give. In the third row of the middle gallery, two delegates from a small species called the Hereth leaned toward each other and spoke quietly. One of them was looking at the door through which Cha had already begun to walk. The delegate's 4 eyes were wide. "Did you know they had built one?" the first Herath asked. "No," the second said. "Did anyone?" The second delegate looked at the door for another moment. "Apparently they did," she said quietly. "They just didn't tell us." On the Prometheus, 19 hours into their journey, Vigil spoke. "Admiral, I am reading the Cathara system at long range. Compact defense vessels are already engaged. I count 31 compact warships. The null-born mass is significantly larger." Yara was on the bridge. She had not left the bridge since they departed Titan. She stood in front of the main viewport looking at the stars ahead. "How significantly larger?" she asked. "The null-born formation is approximately 4 times the combined mass of the compact fleet," Vigil said. "Compact ships are taking damage. 3 vessels are already showing critical system failures." The bridge was quiet. Everyone was at their station. Tomas had his hands resting on the weapons board, not pressing anything yet, just ready. Petra had the navigation locked on approach vector and was adjusting the angle in small increments, already calculating. Yara said, "Vigil, what do we know about this null-born formation specifically?" "I have been observing their engagement pattern since we came into sensor range," Vigil said. 14 minutes of observation. I have identified 3 behavioral patterns and 2 potential vulnerability windows. I will need more observation to confirm." "You'll get more observation," Yara said. "We are 11 minutes out." She turned to face the crew. They looked back at her. 87 people who had spent years training for this. 87 people who were officially nobody, on a ship that officially did not exist, about to enter a battle that nobody had authorized them to fight. She said nothing for a moment. She just looked at them. Then she said, "Let's go to work." The Prometheus dropped out of transit speed, and the Cathara system opened up ahead of them, full of light and fire, and the shapes of ships too numerous to count. The battle was already bad. It was already going the wrong way. Then the Prometheus arrived. The battle at Cathara had been going on for 6 hours by the time the Prometheus arrived. 6 hours was a long time in space combat. Long enough for 3 compact warships to have been completely destroyed. Long enough for 9 more to have taken serious damage and fallen back behind the defensive line. Long enough for the remaining fleet to have organized itself into a formation that everyone on the Prometheus's bridge could immediately see was not working. The compact fleet was arranged in a broad front, the way conventional doctrine said they should be. The large ships were in the center, the smaller and faster ships on the outer edges. They were firing constantly, full power, maximum output. The space between the two sides was bright with energy discharge and the slower orange flash of kinetic weapons. From a distance, it looked like a wall of light, but it was not working. The nullborn did not form a line. That was the first thing Petra noticed as she brought the Prometheus in on a low approach angle, skimming the outer edge of the engagement zone. The nullborn moved as a mass, a vast, dark, constantly shifting mass of individual units that was never quite the same shape twice. They did not have a predictable attack vector. They flowed around the compact's firing solutions, going where the fire was not, reforming into new shapes, pressing forward in some places, and pulling back in others, in patterns that seemed random, but were clearly not. The compact ships, designed to fight enemies who came straight at them, were constantly adjusting and readjusting their aim, and constantly falling slightly behind the nullborn's movement. "They're adapting," Petra said, not alarmed, just observing. Every time the compact fleet adjusts formation, the nullborn change their flow pattern within about 40 seconds. 40 seconds? Tomas said from the weapons station. So they see the compact's formation changes almost instantly, and respond. "Vigil," Yara said. "How long have you been watching?" 23 minutes total since first sensor contact, Vigil said. "I have updated my behavioral model. The nullborn's coordination appears to function without a central command node. Each unit is reacting to local conditions, but sharing information with the whole mass in real time. Disrupting one section does not slow the rest. However, I have identified a pattern in how they prioritize targets. They appear to focus first on the heaviest weapon platforms, the ships doing the most damage to them. They ignore less threatening initially. Yara, process that. So if something shows up that doesn't immediately threaten them, they won't prioritize it. Correct, for a limited time, until they determine what it is and what it can do. She looked at Petra. Bring us in quiet, low-power signature. Give them nothing to read until I say. Petra nodded and made the adjustments. The Prometheus's power output dropped to a fraction of its full level. The ship moved slowly, looking small, looking ordinary, threading between the debris of destroyed ships that was already beginning to spread across the engagement zone. The debris, Yara noticed, was considerable. A Wraith-heavy warship called the Iron Will had been struck hard on its port side and was drifting. It was still mostly intact, but its main engines were clearly not functioning. A smaller Alone cruiser had lost its front section entirely, and its crew sections were broadcasting automated evacuation signals. Several other ships showed the damage marks of nullborn contact. Long, scored burns across hull plating, where nullborn units had struck with what appeared to be directed energy, of a type that the Compact's analysts had not fully characterized yet. At the far edge of the engagement zone, the largest Wraith warship present, the flagship Eternal Dominion, was still fighting. It was the most powerful ship in the Compact fleet, nearly 400 meters long, with more weapon batteries than most stations. It was firing everything it had. The nullborn were flowing around it like water around a stone. They were not attacking it directly. They were pressuring it from multiple angles, forcing it to rotate constantly, to bring its weapons to bear, slowly draining it. Yara watched the Eternal Dominion for a moment. "Vigil," she said. "The nullborn mass. How many individual units do you count?" "Approximately 3,000 visible units within sensor range," Vigil said. "I cannot account for what may be in the outer field. And their weak points. What have you found in 23 minutes?" "3 points of note," Vigil said. "First, they react slowly to changes that are not immediately threatening. A ship moving laterally across their field will take approximately 90 seconds to be redirected toward. Second, the coordination pattern requires each unit to be within approximately 800 meters of at least 2 other units to maintain full integration with the whole. Units that are isolated from this network range show reduced coordination. Third, their forward pressure increases when the enemy retreats. When compact ships fall back, the nullborn accelerate. When compact ships hold or advance, the nullborn slow slightly, as if recalculating. They seem to have been optimized to pursue. Yara absorbed that. She turned to Tomas. "Your torpedo spread configurations, the ones from the old naval doctrine?" "Yes, Admiral. Walk me through the triangle spread, the old indirect approach." Tomas pulled up configuration on his screen without hesitating. The old naval doctrine he had adapted was from Earth's pre-space history, an age of ocean warships, when one fleet could not simply face another head-on, because the angles were wrong, and had to approach from unexpected directions. The principle was simple. Instead of firing directly at a target, you fired at where the target would be once it moved, to avoid where it thought you were firing. It was, in modern space combat, considered too complicated to be practical. If their units have to stay within 800 meters of each other to stay coordinated, Tomas said, his voice getting faster and quieter in the way it did when he was working out a problem, and they respond to retreat by accelerating, we can bait a section of the mass to separate. Send a fast pass across their forward edge. They redirect toward us. We fall back. They accelerate. They stretch their formation. When they stretch past the 800-meter threshold, the isolated units lose coordination. Then we hit the gap. "Time window once the gap opens?" Yara asked. "Unknown," Vigil said, "but I estimate 30 to 60 seconds before they can close it and restore network integration." 30 seconds, Petra said from navigation. "I can work with 30 seconds." "Good," Yara said, "because that is what we are going to give you." She straightened and looked around the bridge. "Here is what we are going to do. First pass. We go in fast across the forward nullborn edge, not firing, just moving. We want them to notice us. We want them to redirect. Petra, that first pass needs to look like we are scared. Make it look like a retreat already starting." Petra nodded. "I can do scared." Second, once they accelerate after us, Tomas executes the triangle spread into the forming gap, not maximum damage. We want to break their network contact in a section, not destroy them outright. If Vigil is right about them losing coordination when isolated, a confused section is more useful to us than a destroyed section. The confusion will spread to adjacent sections, Vigil confirmed. They share information continuously. Confusion in one section will propagate disruption through neighboring sections as they try to reconcile conflicting data. Third, Yara continued, we use the gap to push the compact ships back together. Their problem right now is they are spread out and firing into an enemy that flows around them. If we can compress the nullborn mass from one side, we give the compact fleet a concentrated target. She looked at Tomas. Select the weapon configuration that creates the widest effective pressure zone. Tomas was already typing. Configuration 7, he said. Point pressure spread wide arc. Not ideal for direct kills, but excellent for forcing movement. Like a wall of fire. Perfect, Yara said. Vigil, start the hailing sequence for the Eternal Dominion. Open channel. Channel open, Vigil said. Vreth flagship, Yara said into the open channel. This is the HSV Prometheus Solar and Assembly. We are entering the engagement zone on the northern approach vector. We are going to create a gap in the nullborn forward mass in approximately 4 minutes. When the gap opens, move your fleet forward and concentrate fire on the gap center point. Do not wait. You will have 30 seconds at most. The channel was silent for a moment. Then a voice came back. Deep, clipped. The careful, controlled tone of a Wrath officer who was handling something unexpected. Unidentified vessel. Identify yourself and provide authorization codes. I just identified myself, Yara said calmly. I don't have authorization codes. I'm the ship that wasn't supposed to exist. You can question me after the battle. Right now, when you see the gap, move forward and fire into it. That is all. She looked at Petra. Go. The first pass was fast and clean, and deliberately panic-looking. Petra took the Prometheus in hard on the nullborn mass. Engines at full, moving in a wide, slightly uneven arc that looked, if you were watching it on a tactical screen, like a ship that had come in too fast and was now trying to correct. It was entirely intentional. Every wobble was calculated. She was flying the ship the way an actor played fear, using the two to create exactly the emotion she needed the audience to feel. The nullborn saw them. The response was exactly what Vigil had predicted. A section of the mass, approximately 400 units, began to shift, redirecting toward the new and apparently vulnerable target. They accelerated. They moved away from the main body toward the Prometheus position. They're coming, Petra said, her voice flat and focused. Let them get close, Yara said. Not too close. The nullborn units closed the distance. The Prometheus was still appearing to flee, Petra adjusting speed to stay just barely ahead of the pursuing mass. On the tactical screen, the gap in the nullborn's main body was becoming visible. A dark space in the bright mass, where 400 units used to be. Gap forming, Vigil said. Unit density in the gap zone is dropping below optimal network cohesion threshold now. Tomas, Yara said. Tomas fired. The triangle spread left the Prometheus's forward tubes in a wide fan, not a focused line. The torpedoes did not go directly at the nullborn mass. They went at the angles, the spaces where the pursuing section was still connected to the main body. When they detonated in gaps and at the edges, not in the center of anything. The explosion pattern was designed to create confusion rather than direct destruction, and it worked. The pursuing section lost coherence. The units did not stop moving, but they stopped moving together. They began to scatter in different directions, each one following its own local programming, without the network intelligence to coordinate them. They went wide. They went off course. Some turned back. Some kept going. The gap in the main nullborn mass opened fully. Compact fleet, Yara said into the open channel, broadcasting on all frequencies. Now, the center of the gap, 40 degrees north. Fire now. For a moment, nothing happened, and Yara felt a cold and irrational fear that they would not react in time, that the 30 seconds would pass. Then the Eternal Dominion moved. It was remarkable in its way. 400 meters of Wrath warship, damaged and stressed, shifted forward with all its remaining engines and brought its primary weapon systems to bear on the gap that the Prometheus had created. And the other compact ships, seeing the flagship move, moved with it. The disciplined instinct of a military fleet, follow the leader, worked in their favor here, even if it had been working against them until now. The concentrated fire that hit the gap in the null-born mass was enormous. 6 heavy ships firing everything they had at a single point. The null-born units in that gap, already fragmented from the disruption of their network, had no coordinated response prepared. The damage was catastrophic. Hundreds of units were destroyed or disabled in under 30 seconds. The main null-born mass, for the first time in the entire battle, hesitated. Vigil's voice came through clearly. Null-born forward advance has stopped. I am reading a recalculation pattern in their movement. They are reassessing their tactical model. The confusion from the network disruption is spreading. I estimate 45 seconds of reduced coordination across the whole mass. Configuration 7, Yara said to Tomas. Wide pressure spread, push them back. Tomas did not need telling twice. He had been waiting for this. The wide arc weapon spread came out in overlapping waves, not aimed at individual targets, but filling the space in front of the null-born mass like a wall moving forward. The null-born units at the leading edge, encountering fire from a direction they had not anticipated, began to pull back. The compact fleet, given a moment of breathing room for the first time in 6 hours, kept pressing into the gap. They had found their rhythm now, not the rigid formation rhythm that the null-born had learned to flow around, but something more reactive, following the shape of the battle, rather than trying to impose a shape on it. Petra was working constantly, threading the Prometheus through debris and around the edge of the engagement, never staying still long enough to become a target, always positioning for the next moment. The ship moved the way Quan had designed her to move, fluid, responsive, capable of changing direction without the long preparatory adjustments that heavier vessels required. Vigil was feeding her information in real time, marking threats and opportunities on her navigation display. The battle was not won, not by a long way. The no-born were still out there, still vast, still capable. But the momentum had changed. The Eternal Dominion hailed them again. The voice this time was different. It was still Vareth, still controlled, still careful. But something in its quality had shifted. The particular kind of dismissiveness that Vareth officers generally wore like armor was not fully present. Something had made a crack in it. Unidentified vessel, the voice said. Your weapons configuration is unlike any recognized system in the compact database. Your tactical approach is also unrecognized. Confirm identification. HSV Prometheus, Yara said for the second time. Admiral Yara O'Shea, Solar and Assembly Defense Corps. She paused for one deliberate beat. Human vessel. The channel was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. In the tactical screens around her, the battle continued. The compact fleet pressing its advantage, the no-born mass pulling back and regrouping in the outer zone. Then the voice said, Admiral O'Shea, confirm your vessel is human-built. Every bolt, Yara said. Another pause. Your gap maneuver, the voice said. That was not in any compact tactical doctrine. No, Yara agreed. It was not. Where did it come from? Yara looked across the bridge for a moment. Tomas was watching his screens. Petra was flying. Vigil's status indicator was steady and green. 87 people were doing their jobs with the quiet focus of people who had spent years preparing for exactly this. Old books, she said. The channel was quiet again. Then the null-born are reconfiguring. Their mass is shifting to the eastern approach. I see it, Yara said. Redirect your fleet to the eastern anchor point. We will handle the center. She looked at Petra. Eastern intercept, fast approach, same bait pattern. Same bait pattern, Petra confirmed, and the Prometheus was already moving. The battle lasted another 4 hours after the Prometheus arrived. 4 more hours of hard, brutal, close-range fighting that left everyone on the ship exhausted, and most of the compact fleet's ships in need of significant repair. 3 more compact vessels were destroyed in those 4 hours. The Prometheus took 2 solid hits, the first from a section of null-born units that had adapted to the bait pattern and stopped pursuing, requiring Tomas to develop a new approach on the spot, which he did in 6 minutes. The second hit was a glancing strike that damaged the port thruster array and made Petra's flying considerably more difficult, which she handled without complaint and with only slightly more swearing than was normally acceptable on a military bridge. Vigil processed information continuously throughout, updating its model of nullborn behavior, finding new patterns, flagging new opportunities. By the end of the battle, its model was detailed enough that it could predict individual nullborn section movements with roughly 70% accuracy, 10 seconds in advance. The nullborn did not break. They did not surrender. They were not defeated, not truly. But they stopped advancing. At some point in the last hour of fighting, their mass simply stopped pressing forward and began to hold position, and then slowly to draw back. Compact sensors tracked them pulling away from the Cathara system, retreating back toward the outer zone. It was not a permanent retreat. Everyone knew that. The nullborn were recalculating, reassessing, and reforming. They would return, but they were not here now, and Cathara was intact, and 2 billion people were still alive. In the silence after, De Young Quan, sitting at his monitoring station in the lower deck of the Prometheus, with a cold cup of tea beside him, looked at the ship's damage report on his screen. Port thruster array at 40%, 2 external sensor nodes damaged, 1 minor hull breach in the forward storage section, no casualties, already sealed. The rest of the ship was in good condition. Every redundant system had functioned as designed. Every power rerouting had worked correctly. Every contingency had held. He had given 19 years to make sure that was true. He had missed his daughter growing up to make sure that was true. He thought about her message, "Are you okay?" And he thought that he would need to have a very long conversation with her soon, about what he had been doing, about why, about the ship that she did not know existed. He would tell her everything. She deserved to know. But first, he picked up the cold tea and drank it, and let the quiet of the moment rest around him for just a little while, because the Prometheus had done what she was built to do, and that was, for now, enough. On the damaged bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Commander Vrethsar, who had spoken to Yara twice on the open channel, and had not introduced himself either time, sat in his command chair and looked at the tactical display, where the Prometheus was visible as a small green marker at the edge of the engagement zone. His first officer had filed a preliminary report. It included, at Vrithsar's specific request, a detailed accounting of every tactic the human ship had used during the battle. The gap maneuver, the bait approach, the pressure spread, the way the ship's weapons had been reconfigured twice mid-battle, the AI system that had appeared to anticipate nullborn movements with increasing accuracy as the engagement progressed. He read through the report carefully. He had been fighting in space for 32 years. He had commanded ships in 7 significant engagements. He had studied, as all Vareth officers did, the full history of compact military doctrine back to its origins. He had never seen a ship fight the way the Prometheus had fought today. It was not that she was the most powerful vessel present. She was not. It was not that she had destroyed the most nullborn units. She had not. What she had done was something that was harder to define, and harder perhaps to train for. She had read the battle. She had understood what was needed, not in terms of maximum firepower, but in terms of maximum effect. She had used every tool available, including tools that were not in any standard doctrine, and she had used them at the right moment, in the right way, for the right reason. He began writing his incident report. At the top of the section marked Tactical Assessment of Friendly Forces, he wrote a sentence that surprised him slightly when he reread it, because he had not planned to write it, and it had come out of his mind fully formed. The human vessel operated at a level of tactical sophistication that this commander has not previously encountered in 32 years of active service. He looked at that sentence for a moment. Then he left it in and continued writing. The footage reached every corner of the compact within 48 hours. It was not officially released by anyone. It was pulled from the sensor logs of 7 different compact ships that had been present at the Battle of Cathara, compiled by an unknown party. Most believed it was a junior communications technician on a Pelhari corvette who had stayed up all night doing it, and distributed through the compact's public information network without any authorization, clearance, or warning. The footage showed the Prometheus fighting. It showed the first pass across the nullborn mass, the ship moving with a controlled, deliberate speed that looked reckless, but clearly was not. It showed the gap opening, the compact fleet responding, the coordinated pressure spread, pushing the nullborn back. It showed the ship taking 2 hits and continuing to fight as if nothing significant had happened. It showed the weapon reconfigurations mid-battle that compact analysts had not stopped talking about since the engagement ended. It showed the moment when the Eternal Dominion moved forward into the gap and the way the rest of the fleet followed. It showed what happened when a ship that was not supposed to exist showed up and changed the direction of a battle that had been going badly wrong. By the end of the first day, the footage had been watched by an estimated 3 billion people across 47 species. By the end of the second day, that number had doubled. The Compact Council, which had been preparing an official censure motion against Earth for Accord violations, found itself in the unusual position of issuing a formal document condemning an action that much of the galaxy was openly celebrating. The Vreth hardliners pushed forward with the censure anyway. 3 small species, the Harath, the Velhu, and a newly admitted species called the Tauren, announced publicly that they opposed the censure. The Alun delegation, which had long had complicated feelings about Vreth dominance of the Council, was conspicuously silent on the matter, which in compact politics meant exactly what it appeared to mean. High Arbiter Sewell called the emergency session. The chamber was full again. Every seat taken, every delegation present. There was a different quality to the crowd this time compared to the emergency summit 2 weeks ago. That session had been full of fear and argument. This one was full of something harder to name, a kind of tense, waiting uncertainty, as if the chamber knew that something was going to be decided today that could not be undecided later. Sewell opened the session by formally presenting the censure motion against the Solar and Assembly. He spoke for 11 minutes. He was precise. He quoted the Vassal Accord chapter in verse. He described the Accord's construction and purpose to ensure galactic stability by preventing young, militarily immature species from developing weapons capabilities before they were ready. He said that whatever the Prometheus had accomplished at Cathara was irrelevant to the question of legality. He said that allowing Accord violations to go unaddressed, regardless of circumstances, would permanently undermine the foundations of the Compact's legal structure. He was not wrong about any of this. Exactly. That was what made it difficult. When he finished, the floor was open for responses. Several delegates spoke. 2 supported the censure. 1 called for a modified response, a formal reprimand rather than full censure, paired with a committee review of the Accord's tier classification system. 2 others spoke at length about the Nullborn threat and argued that the situation changed the calculation entirely. Then Delegate Unica stood up. She was not in the back section today. Before the session, she had submitted a formal motion under the Compact's own procedural rules, requesting that the human delegation be granted temporary front floor status for the duration of this specific session. The motion required approval from 6 council members. She had received approval from 8 of them, from minor and mid-tier species, whose names surprised nobody, and 3 of them from elder race delegations, whose names surprised everyone. She stood at a podium in the center of the floor, the same floor where Yara Osai had stood 17 times, the same floor where the word denied had been said 17 times in 4 minutes or less. Cha looked at the council without any visible nervousness. She had been preparing for this for a long time, not this specific moment. She could not have predicted this specific moment exactly, but this kind of moment. The kind that came once in a career if you were very patient and very careful and very clear about what you were trying to do. I want to talk about the Accord, she said. Specifically, I want to talk about why it exists. She paused, making eye contact with the parts of the chamber that needed to feel seen before they would actually listen. The Vassal Accord was created, she said, to protect galactic stability from the danger of young civilizations acquiring military power before they had the wisdom to use it responsibly. That was the stated purpose. I'm not going to argue with the purpose. The purpose is reasonable. She paused again. But the Accord was also written by civilizations that had already secured their own safety. It was written by species that already had the ships and the weapons and the tier classifications that the Accord then protected. They were not writing rules for themselves. They were writing rules for everyone who came after. Several Eldrazi delegates shifted in their seats. Cho kept going. The question the Accord was never designed to answer, she said, is what happens when the structure that the Accord was meant to protect, the structure of the compact itself, faces a threat that the compact's existing forces cannot stop alone. She looked at the tactical display that had been mounted at the front of the chamber, showing the recorded data from the Battle of Cathara. We have now lost 5 combined fleets to the Nullborn. Cathara was the first engagement in all 5, where the Nullborn's advance was stopped. Not won, stopped. Cathara still stands. 2 billion people are still alive. That happened because one ship that was not supposed to exist showed up and did something that nobody expected. She picked up her notepad from the podium. "I want to read a list," she said. Some delegates in the chamber recognized that phrase. They had heard it from her before, 2 weeks ago in this same chamber, and they remembered what it contained. A few sat slightly straighter. "This is a different list," Cho said. "This is a list of every compact member species that requested, at some point in its history, a tier reclassification upward, after demonstrating a significant independent military capability." She began to read. The Vreth, petitioning the original Compact Council 412 years ago, approved. The Alun, petitioning the Council 308 years ago, approved. The Pelherin. She read 22 names. Every one of them was an elder race, or a mid-tier species, now considered a full and valued member of the Compact. Every single one of them had, at some point, demonstrated capability first, and petitioned for recognition after. She set the notepad down. "We built the Prometheus because we needed to survive," she said. "We deployed her because others needed to survive. If that is a crime under the Accord, then this list of 22 species committed the same crime, and this council approved their reclassification anyway. Because the Compact has always, in the end, recognized capability when it was demonstrated. That is what we are asking you to do now." She stood still for a moment. Then she said the last thing, the thing she had been saving because it needed to land at the end, after everything else, when the chamber was already thinking about all of it. "You told us for 17 years that we were not ready," she said. "You told us we were impulsive, unstable, too young, too emotional. You said giving us warships would be giving a child a plasma torch. I am standing here today to tell you that the child you described does not exist. What exists is a species that spent 40 years building something in secret in the dark, at enormous cost, with no guarantee it would ever be used, because we believed that the day would come when it needed to be used. That is not impulsive. That is not unstable. That is, by any measure, exactly the kind of patient long-term commitment to survival that you claim to respect in older civilizations." She looked at Sewell directly. "We are not asking for your forgiveness," she said. "We are telling you what we are, and we are asking whether the Compact intends to recognize it." She sat down. The chamber was very quiet. The censure motion failed. It did not fail narrowly. It failed 29 to 18, with 9 abstentions. It was a clear result by Compact Council standards where close votes were more common than clear ones. The reclassification motion that followed, submitted by the Herath delegation and co-signed by 11 others, passed 31 to 14. Humanity was reclassified to Tier 2 in the shortest reclassification hearing in Compact history. The vote was taken the same afternoon, with no delay for review committees or formal study periods, because every delegate in the room had just watched the battle footage and sat through Cha's speech, and even the ones who had voted against reclassification privately understood which way this was going. High Arbiter Sewell registered his formal objection for the record. He did not speak again during the session. In the corridor outside the chamber after the session, 3 delegates from different species, the Herath representative, a Tauran delegate named Vasif, and to the considerable surprise of everyone who saw it, a junior member of the Alun delegation approached Cha and asked for a private meeting. The Alun delegate said quietly that their delegation had been reviewing some proposals regarding joint shipbuilding partnerships and believed that the timing might now be right to discuss them. Chow said she would be happy to schedule a meeting. She waited until they had moved away before she allowed herself a single, small, private smile. Then she took out her personal communicator and sent Yara a 2-word message: "We won." Project Iron Veil was declassified 10 days after the reclassification vote. The decision was made by the Solar and Assembly, and it was not a difficult decision. There was no longer any point in secrecy. The entire galaxy had seen the Prometheus fight. The question was not whether to reveal the project, but how. The Assembly chose to do it simply. A full public release of the project's history, its development, its personnel, its costs, and its achievements. All of it from the first unauthorized design meeting 40 years ago to the Battle of Cathara. The release included the names of everyone who had ever worked on Ironvale. Thousands of names. Engineers and scientists and pilots and logistics staff and administrative personnel and security teams and medical staff, and a dozen other categories of people who had spent parts or all of their careers working in secret on something they could never talk about. De Young Kwan's name was on the list. So was Alara Vass's name. So were the names of people who had worked at Ironvale for a year before moving on, and people who had given 30 years without ever going back to the surface world, and people who had died before the ship was finished and never saw what they had helped build. The response was significant. On Earth, there were public celebrations in several cities. Not the official kind with organized parades, but the spontaneous kind, where people gathered in squares and streets because they wanted to be together when they heard something that changed how they understood the world. On other worlds, the reaction was different, but also notable. On Hareth Prime, the footage of the Prometheus fighting at Cathara was broadcast on public screens in the main population centers, and the commentary that ran alongside it was not the usual compact analysis framing. It was simpler than that. It was just people watching a ship fight. On Vreth Prime, the response was more contained, but Commander Vreth Sar's incident report, which had been filed through official channels and was included in the IRO and Ve'ilal declassification package, was reproduced in full in 3 different Vreth public information outlets. The line about tactical sophistication and 32 years of service was the most quoted sentence in all of them. Vreth Sar, who had not authorized the report's public release, read the coverage in his quarters aboard the Eternal Dominion, now undergoing repair at the Ura assembly point. He read it with the particular stillness of a person who was waiting to know how he felt about something. He was not angry about the publication. He had written what was true, and he had known when he wrote it that truth had a way of going where it was not invited. He had also, the day after the battle, begun reading through the IRO and VIL technical files that had been shared with senior compact military commanders as part of the reclassification process. He had read about the redundant power systems, about the adaptive weapon configuration capability, about Vigil. He had read about the old Earth naval doctrine that Tomas Ademi had adapted for modern space combat, and he had found, to his irritation and then to his interest, that the underlying logic of it was correct, and that he had never thought to apply it himself, only because no one in Vreth military education had ever pointed to an ocean warship from 1,000 years ago and said, "This is still worth knowing." He was making notes. He did not think he would contact the Prometheus directly. That would be too much to ask perhaps of himself and of OSI, but he thought that when the Joint Tactical Review Committee was assembled, and there would be one, now that the reclassification had passed, the joint committees always followed, he would volunteer for it. There were things, he thought carefully, that 32 years in the Vreth fleet had not taught him. That was not a comfortable thought, but he had spent his career learning to sit with uncomfortable truths when the evidence demanded it. The evidence was demanding it. Yara Ose was given a formal commission 3 weeks after the reclassification, not by the Solar and Assembly, which had technically already recorded her resignation, by the Compact Council itself, which had a procedure rarely used for commissioning officers of non-standard status in extraordinary circumstances. The commission came with a new rank designation that the Compact's translators rendered as something close to Fleet Admiral, a title that carried authority across multiple vessels. She accepted it in a short, quiet ceremony in a conference room on Vreth Prime, with Cha and a small group of Compact officials present. There were no speeches. There was a handshake with the Herath delegate who had submitted the reclassification motion, and a brief formal exchange of words. And then she had her commission, and that was that. She was officially and on record the first human officer to hold a command rank recognized by the full Compact Council. 3 more Prometheus-class vessels were commissioned immediately afterward. The designs had been ready for years. Kwan had made sure of that, building in the possibility that more ships would be needed by designing the Prometheus as a template rather than a unique project. The new ships would be built openly at an Eero and Vale facility that was no longer secret, with human engineers working in full view of the galaxy. 2 of the 3 new ships were built in partnership with other compact species. The Harith contributed their material science expertise, which resulted in an improved hull alloy that was lighter and stronger than the original. The Tauren, who turned out to have developed a targeting algorithm that was highly compatible with Vigil's architecture, contributed to a significant upgrade of the AI system across all 4 vessels. It was not the way Eero and Vale had imagined the future would come. They had imagined fighting for permission, or fighting while still unauthorized, or fighting alone. They had not imagined being asked for blueprints. But the Compact had been frightened, and frightened people, even powerful ones, eventually stopped asking who was allowed to help and started asking who could. The Null-born threat did not end after Cathara. Everyone had known it would not. Over the following months, 3 more engagements occurred in the outer sectors. The Prometheus was present at 2 of them. In both cases, the combined force performed better than any previous engagement, not because the Prometheus alone made the difference, but because the compact fleet had watched the battle footage, read Vrethsar's report, attended the joint tactical review committees, and started asking different questions about how to fight an enemy that adapted. They had started thinking sideways, even if it did not come naturally, even if the older habits of rigid doctrine kept reasserting themselves and had to be pushed back each time. Vigil's model of null-born behavior, updated through multiple engagements now, was shared with every compact fleet. It became the foundation of a new tactical approach, one that acknowledged the null-born's adaptability and tried to stay one step ahead of it, rather than finding a single doctrine that worked and repeating it until the enemy had solved it. The war was long. It would be long. The galaxy understood that now. In a way, it had not before Cathara. But the galaxy was still there. On a gray afternoon on Earth, Di Yong Quan sat across a table from his daughter in a small restaurant in Seoul. It was the first time he had seen her in person in 8 months, since the declassification, since the world had learned what her absent, boring father had actually been doing all this time. Her name was Su Yun, and she was 17 years old, and she had, in the weeks after the declassification, said very little to him about any of it. She had responded to his messages. She had agreed to this meeting, but she had said very little. He had been worried about what she was thinking. They sat with their food between them, and for a while neither of them spoke. The restaurant was quiet. There was a window, and outside the window was a gray Seoul afternoon, ordinary and familiar. Then Su-yeon said, "They're really showing the footage everywhere." "Yes," he said. "I watched it," she said. "A few times." He waited. "Which part did you build?" she asked. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "Most of the engine and power sections. The redundant power routing system, the part that lets her keep fighting when she's been damaged. That was mine." She nodded slowly. She was looking at the table. "I was angry," she said. "For a while, when I found out, I was angry that you didn't tell me." "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." She was quiet for a moment. "But then I watched the footage again," she said. "And I read some of the articles about how long it took, about how many people." She looked up at him. "About Cathara." She said the word Cathara, the way people said the names of places where something important had happened, with a slight pause before it, with wait. "You couldn't tell me," she said. It was not quite a question. "No," he said. "I couldn't." She looked at him for a long moment. He could not entirely read her face. She was 17, and she was complicated, the way all 17-year-olds were complicated, and he had missed enough of her growing up to have gaps in his understanding of her that would take time to close. Then she said, very quietly, "The part you built, the redundant power routing, that's the part that kept the ship alive when she was hit." "Yes, so that's the part that kept Admiral Osei alive, and 86 other people," he said. She sat with that for a moment. Then she nodded once, a small definite nod, and picked up her food and began to eat. And he understood that this was not forgiveness, not entirely, not yet, but it was the beginning of understanding, which was the thing that forgiveness needed before it could arrive. He picked up his food too. They ate together in the gray afternoon, and it was ordinary, and it was enough. The Prometheus was docked at the Varath Prime station when the new ships came through. Yara was on the bridge at the viewport, looking at the slow movement of traffic around the station. The compact warships going in and out, the supply convoys, the diplomatic transports. It was a view she had imagined in some form or another for a long time, not in the detail. You could not imagine the specific details of things that had not yet happened, but the general shape of it being here, openly, under human colors, recognized that she had imagined. That had been the destination she was navigating toward for 30 years. Vigil spoke quietly from the bridge system around her. "Admiral, I am reading 3 vessels arriving at the outer jump point." She watched the viewport. The first ship came through the jump point with the particular ripple of light that marked the end of a transit jump. It was a Prometheus-class vessel. She could see it immediately in the profile. The shape that Quan had spent 19 years perfecting. It bore the name HSV Defiance on its hull, painted in the standard type that all solar assembly vessels now used. The second ship came through 30 seconds later, HSV Unyielding. The third, HSV Common Ground. That last name had been chosen by the joint human-Hereth crew that would operate her, one of the partnership ships. Yara had been told the name before the ship was finished, and had thought it was a good name, not a warlike name, not a name about strength or dominance or defiance. A name about the thing that happened when different kinds of people decided to face the same problem together. Vigil spoke again. "The Defiance is hailing. They are requesting our position and asking if we require escort." Yara looked at the 3 ships coming into position around the station. 1 human-built, 2 partnerships, all of them carrying Vigil systems, redundant power routing, reconfigurable weapon mounts, all the things that 40 years of secret work had produced. She thought about what to say. She thought about the Crystal Hall and the 17 denials. She thought about Soul's face. She thought about the laughter from the gallery. She thought about Quan in the engine room with his cold tea, and Voss smiling in the depths of Titan, and Petra flying scared on purpose, and Tomas with his old Earth books, and Vigil saying ready in the quiet of Iro, and Cha standing at the podium reading 41 names out loud in a room that had never expected to have to listen to her. She thought about all of it. Then she said, "Vigil, tell the Defiance we appreciate the offer." "Yes, Admiral, and tell them we'll escort them." Vigil transmitted the message. The 3 new ships adjusted their approach to form up alongside the Prometheus, all 4 moving together toward the station, toward Varath Prime, toward the galaxy that had spent 100 years deciding humanity was too young, too unstable, and too small to matter. The ships moved under human colors in the full light of a foreign star, openly, officially, with the recognition of the compact behind them, not because the compact had given them permission to exist, but because they had existed anyway, in the dark, for 40 years, until the day came when the galaxy needed them. They had not asked for that day. They had simply been ready for it. And that, in the end, was everything.